So 1 year ago, I presented at this very event on the beginning of a project on housing insecurity, and I ended that presentation with the hope that it would grow a social impact research program that students could be a part of. So this year, we have proof that that's possible. The Unsheltered Des Moines study grew from the connections and ideas from work we did last year. Relationships we built through last year's course on interviewing and housing insecurity were how we were engaged to do a qualitative study of homelessness, specifically why people chose not to come into shelter in really extreme weather that we have here in Des Moines. This hands-on social impact infrastructure of 2022 resulted in a policy-relevant report in 2023, as well as educational experience for Drake students. Representatives from several homelessness service providers and I worked out a research agenda last spring. They brought topical expertise, I brought research design to the table, and we planned to survey 150 people who had lived experience with unsheltered homelessness and then interview in depth a portion of them. But it was May and we were racing against time because it gets cold really quickly in Iowa. So team building is how we beat that race. We beat time in that race. Dr. Matthew Record, he's an expert in housing policy, a political scientist. He joined our team. We got financial support from Drake and the community, and we hired an interdisciplinary team of Drake undergraduates whose majors range from neuroscience to strategic political communication.
Living outside means exposure to the cold, the rain, and exposure to potential victimization. And so a reasonable assumption is that if there is shelter space available, an individual living outside would certainly want it. However, when discussing homelessness, the perspective of the people experiencing it is often shunted aside. When we do talk about homelessness, we usually talk about it through the lens of how it impacts people with homes. And so our understanding is quite lacking. Part of this is because talking to people living unsheltered is tough. It's not something people are usually proud of, and they are often literally hard to find, pushed to the margins of our cities. Most studies of homeless individuals still focus on those in shelters, and people living outside rarely get a chance to tell their story.
I joined this project because I wanted to learn more about the Des Moines community, where I've been living for the last 4 years. I'm a neuroscience major, and I ultimately want to go to medical school, and this experience has just enhanced that desire and shown me how important it is to understand the lived experiences of marginalized groups. Recruiting people for surveys and interviews was an eye-opening experience. We met them by hiking out to their camps, by walking around sky bridges, and over lunch at various meal sites this summer. We met them on the sidewalks of downtown, at the library, and waiting outside Des Moines shelters. And then we got to interview 37 people. What was it like? Like meeting strangers who are going to be close acquaintances in just a few hours. A woman not much older than me said, "Everybody thinks we're homeless because we choose that. Sometimes that's not the issue. It just so happens that our money just wasn't there because of our job being so stupid and now we're back on the streets. We didn't choose that. We don't choose to have two jobs and still have no money." I think one of the most impactful things for me was being able to do analysis. I helped with analysis of interviews by coding themes for the final report, and our research team meetings allowed me to incorporate my own ideas. One theme I dissected from this research is how double distrust fosters the Des Moines unsheltered population, and I'm going to present on that topic later this month at the Midwestern Sociological Society.
What we know from the existing research is that people tend to avoid shelter when shelters force them into untenable social situations, or threaten their safety, disrupt their sense of purpose, or disrupt their sense of dignity. The use of large congregate shelters meant that people often felt unsafe, or as if they had no control over their person. Rules about when residents had to arrive, whether they could have cell phones, when they had to eat, these norms were considered disruptive and undermined dignity. On top of all that, resources for homeless service provision are extremely insufficient. Politically, we allocate very little funding for homeless services, affordable housing, or permanent supportive housing. Many policies constrain service provision based on an assumption that if services are too generous, people will consume them even when they aren't needed. In effect, that people will choose to be homeless. One of the most common sentiments expressed was that people were not looking for any special consideration, just a modicum of empathy, a sense of dignity, and a desire for a home, a place to rest and be themselves at the end of a long day, exactly like the rest of us.
So what do we do with this information? We obviously will report to policymakers, and we'll do the academic circuit. So next month, I'll be presiding over a panel and presenting about homelessness and community at the Midwest Sociological Association. Dr. Record is developing a policy-heavy paper for another conference, and this kind of work is good for Drake, our reputation, and our tenure files, obviously. But as social researchers, I really feel it's our duty and opportunity to project the voices of the people we talk to. So we did analysis, we combined ideas, we looked for themes, and then we spoke to people to get the information out there. We've talked to reporters, we've been interviewed on TV and radio, and directed people to read the report. We've presented at civic meetings. And we're trying to work up a way to sustain this, to really make it part of our teaching and the teaching that's possible at Drake. And as an educator, we really want to continue to include students in knowledge creation, empower them to make change. One of my favorite memories of the summer was sitting around and just talking about themes with the students.
Next steps include evaluation, management, strategic communication, advocacy. Students extended this project to include interviews of service providers in the fall semester, and students in my policy analysis section this semester are exploring potential responses and cost-benefit analysis. The Roosevelt Institute is also considering taking up the cause. Professor Talbert and I hope to extend this model to other issues like rural homelessness and affordable housing.
So we're continuing to build something, and we've kind of called it our policy and evaluation lab, but we're going to start out with this project and we'll go who knows where. But it will put our community first, focus on social impact and responsibility, and provide opportunities for our students to be change makers as researchers.